Before Eliphas Levi existed, there was Alphonse Louis Constant. He was not an occultist. He was a revolutionary. When he left the seminary in the mid-1830s, he walked into a politically charged decade. The gap between the wealthy and the laboring poor was catastrophic. Utopian ideas were everywhere. The possibility of total social transformation felt not just plausible, but inevitable to an entire generation. Constant threw himself into it. He moved in a circle of Parisian bohemians and radical thinkers. One of his close friends was Flora Tristan, a pioneering feminist and labor organizer, exhausted from her campaigns. Another was Simon Ganneau, an eccentric socialist mystic who called himself the Mappa, preaching a fusion of Mary and God. These were not fringe figures to Constant. They were his people, shaping his worldview. He was also deeply influenced by Félicite de Lamennais, a Catholic priest who broke with Rome. Lamennais declared that true Christianity demanded social revolution. The Church had betrayed Christ by siding with the powerful. That argument shaped everything Constant wrote. In February 1841, he published La Bible de la Liberté. The book argued that the Church had corrupted the original revolutionary message of Christianity. It used Lucifer not as a devil, but as a symbol of light and reason opposing tyranny. The text promoted a symbolic reinterpretation of the Bible as a framework for social liberation. The government was not amused. He was charged with attacking public and religious morals. Sentenced to 8 months in prison and fined 300 francs. He served longer because he could not pay. He was taken to the Sainte-Pelagie prison in Paris, a facility for political dissidents and intellectual troublemakers. He was not alone there. He was surrounded by some of the sharpest minds in France. And it was inside Sainte-Pelagie that he first read Swedenborg. Emanuel Swedenborg, the Swedish mystic who claimed direct communication with angels and described in exhaustive detail the architecture of the spiritual world, was available in the prison library. Constant read him carefully. He was not yet an occultist, but something was beginning to shift. He got out. He went back to writing pamphlets. In 1846, he published La Voix de la Famine, The Voice of Famine. It was a violently provocative text, calling the starvation of the French poor a direct consequence of the ruling class's indifference. The government treated it as an incitement to class warfare. He was arrested again. This time, he received a sentence of 1 year and a fine of 1,000 francs. The sentence was significantly shortened at the specific request of his pregnant wife, Marie Noémie Cadiot, who petitioned the court on his behalf. He was released early because his wife intervened. He never forgot that. The story of Alphonse Constant and Marie Noémie Cadiot is one of the stranger stories in the history of Western esotericism, and it has almost never been told straight. They met in the early 1840s. Constant was in his early 30s. He was brilliant, passionately political, chronically poor, and recently released from prison. He was not, by any conventional measure, a promising prospect. According to the account preserved by the Eliphas Levi circle, he actually fell for a different woman, a young woman named Eugenie, a friend of Noémie's. His preference was for Eugenie, but Noémie arrived at his apartment one day and stayed. Her father found out. The confrontation that followed left Constant with no good options. He married Noémie in 1846 to avoid a conflict with her father that he could not afford and did not want. The marriage was troubled from the beginning, and the troubles compounded. They had children, stillborn twins. Then a daughter, Marie, who lived to the age of 7 before dying in 1854, the year Constant published the first volume of Transcendental Magic. He buried his daughter. What is less known is that during this same period, Constant had an illegitimate son with Eugenie, the woman he had originally preferred. The boy was born on September 29, 1846, just months after Constant's marriage to Noémie. The child never bore his name. The marriage stumbled forward under the weight of all of this. Then Constant made a decision that accelerated everything. He became involved in a left-wing publication called the Revue Progressive. The paper was owned by a man named the Marquis de Montferrer. Noemi was contributing to the same paper. Constant, absorbed in Kabbalistic studies and building a unified theory of hidden knowledge, did not notice that his wife and the Marquis were becoming close. Very close. One account of the period says it plainly. Constant did not notice what was going on until it was too late. By the early 1850s, Noemi had left him. She left him not for obscurity, but for a man of title and property, the same Marquis whose paper had brought them both into the same orbit. She went on to become a sculptor of real reputation in her own right, working eventually on the reliefs of the Fontaine Saint-Michel in Paris and decorative work for the Louvre. The marriage was formally annulled in civil court in January 1865. What happened to Constant in the immediate aftermath of the betrayal is one of the more remarkable pivot points in the history of occultism. He immersed himself completely in his writing. The man who had spent a decade as a revolutionary pamphleteer, who had been imprisoned twice for his politics, who had watched every socialist dream of his generation shatter in the June 1849 massacres when the revolutionary movement was drowned in blood, and who had now lost his marriage, his children, and whatever domestic stability he had managed to build, turned entirely inward. He adopted a new name. Alphonse Louis Constant took his given names and transliterated them into Hebrew. Alphonse became Eliphas. Louis became Levi. The man who was born Alphonse Constant ceased to exist. Eliphas Levi began to write. In 1854, the newly renamed Eliphas Levi traveled to London. His reasons were practical. He had heard that the English were experiencing a craze for the occult, and he hoped to find students and patrons and like-minded thinkers who might support the work he was building. He was sorely disappointed. The English occult market of 1854 was dominated by spiritualist mediums working with conjurers' tricks, table rapping, materialized spirits, voices from the beyond delivered through elaborate stage machinery. Levi despised all of it. He believed such performances were not merely dishonest. He believed they were genuinely dangerous, like giving matches to children. He found almost no audience for his more rigorous approach. But he did find one connection that would follow him for the rest of his life. The connection was to Edward Bulwer-Lytton, one of the most famous novelists in England. Bulwer-Lytton had written The Last Days of Pompeii, coined phrases, and served in Parliament. He was also a serious student of the occult, initiated into esoteric traditions, interested in ceremonial magic. The exact nature of their relationship remains disputed. Only one formal letter from Levi was found, but the letter referenced an evocation of elementary spirits performed together on the roof of the London Pantheon. Whatever the precise nature of their connection, they met. They worked together at least once. Bulwer-Lytton's story, The Haunted and the Haunters, featured a magician scholars identified as a portrait of Levi. The more important London encounter, however, was with a woman Levi never named. He describes her in Transcendental Magic, an elderly woman with gray eyebrows and black eyes of unusual brilliance. She knew who he was. She knew of his presence in London through a connection to Sir Biel. She showed him what she called a complete magical cabinet. She asked him to perform an evocation. The target was Apollonius of Tyana. Levi prepared for 21 days, fasting and meditating on the ancient philosopher. He conducted the evocation. Something appeared. He described it with careful precision and never repeated the experiment. What he took from London was not students, not patrons, not the enthusiastic audience he had hoped for. What he took was the certainty that the forces he was theorizing about were real. He returned to Paris and finished writing the book that would carry his new name into history. Eliphas Levi died on May 31, 1875. He left behind a small circle of devoted students and a modest income from private lessons. His body of work had changed Western esotericism permanently. He also left behind the Baphomet drawing. And almost immediately, the Baphomet drawing was stolen. Not physically. Legally, anyone could reprint it. But what was stolen was its meaning. The story of how that happened runs through one of the most audacious hoaxes in the history of modern religion. In the early 1880s, a French journalist named Leo Taxil decided to destroy the reputation of Freemasonry. Taxil had previously written anti-Catholic pamphlets. He now reversed course, pretending to convert to Catholicism. He announced that as penance, he would expose the secret truth about the Masons. The truth he exposed was entirely invented. He fabricated a secret inner order called the Palladium Rite. He invented a high priestess named Diana Vaughan. He described rituals of devil worship, murder, and sexual perversion taking place in Masonic lodges across the world. And to make his fabrications look legitimate, he reached for the most recognizable image in the European occult world. He reprinted the Baphomet as the idol the Masons secretly worshipped. He took it a step further. He invented a quote and attributed it to Albert Pike, Grand Commander of the Scottish Rite's southern jurisdiction. Pike was the man who had actually translated Levi's work into English for Scottish Rite degree lectures. The invented quote declared that Lucifer was the true god of the Masons, the god of light opposing the dark deity of Christianity. The Catholic Church was delighted. Anti-Masonic publications across Europe reprinted the Baphomet image as proof of exactly what Taxil claimed. A Catholic publication called La Femme et l'Enfant, Ban's La Franc-Maçonnerie, featured Levi's drawing directly, labeled as the object of Masonic veneration. The hoax ran for 12 years. The only prominent skeptic who called it out before the end was Arthur Edward Waite, the same Waite who would later co-create the Rider-Waite Tarot and translate Levi into English. In 1896, Waite published a book called Devil Worship in France, which systematically dismantled Taxil's claims. He pointed out internal contradictions, noted that some of the alleged Masonic lodges had not existed at the times and places Taxil described, and documented how heavily Taxil had plagiarized and distorted Levi's own writings to build his case. In 1897, Leo Taxil called a press conference. He stood before an audience that included journalists, Catholic clergy, and true believers in his revelations. He told them he had made the whole thing up. Diana Vaughan did not exist. The Palladium Rite did not exist. The devil-worshipping Masons did not exist. The entire 12-year campaign had been a hoax designed to mock both Freemasonry and the Catholic officials, who had been credulous enough to believe him. The room erupted. He had to be escorted out under police protection. But the damage was done. Levi's Baphomet, which he had drawn in the 1850s as a diagram of balanced opposites, a philosophical image of equilibrium between light and dark, had now been burned into the Western imagination as a symbol of Satanism. A decade of anti-Masonic propaganda, reprinted across Europe and eventually the United States, had fixed an association that no retraction could fully erase. The quote Taxil invented for Albert Pike is still circulated today, cited in good faith by people who have no idea it came from a hoaxer, who admitted the fabrication in public in 1897. Alphonse Louis Constant became Eliphas Levi because his first life collapsed. The politics failed. The revolution he believed in was drowned in blood. The marriage ended in betrayal he did not see coming. The children died. A name he had carried since birth no longer fit the man he was becoming. He built a second life from the ruins of the first. That second life changed Western esotericism permanently. But even the legacy he built was hijacked almost immediately after his death. His most famous image stripped of its meaning and weaponized for purposes he would have found incomprehensible. He was a Catholic mystic who believed in God and argued that magic and Christianity were compatible if you understood both correctly. His Baphomet became the icon of Satanism. He was a political radical who spent the 1840s arguing for the liberation of the poor. His work was translated into English, most prominently by the Grand Commander of an American Masonic order. He chose a new name to signal the end of one life and the beginning of another. The name outlasted him by 170 years. The life behind the name has been almost entirely forgotten. Illuminated Infamy. The story behind the story.